Now, you said in your talk earlier that we need to bring bankers back into society. But given that banking is now so inextricably tied up with austerity, with crises, with deep social cleavages now for Europe's citizens, can banking be redeemed in history from its current position as a villain in the grand scheme of things?
Absolutely. So I think the premise is not entitled. The bankers were not villains. So we had a system where finance went through radical changes, and you have not banking supervision failed too. The politicians took the tax receipts. They were happy too. So I think society believed that the banking system can survive in a very lightly regulated way, and it proved to be not true. So what we are now doing is repositioning the banking system and make it useful for society. Banking was always useful. There is no industrial development, there are no jobs, there is no creation of wealth, there is no preservation of wealth without the banking system, so it's absolutely required. And I think the reforms that have been enacted over the last 80 years, so they are quite far-reaching and will help us. But it's quite simple, that from your personal relationship, it takes you 2 minutes to break 20 years of trust that have been created. So it will take us a long time to rebuild it, but eventually we can.
And as a banker yourself, do you think we need more of a synthesis between banking historians and bankers in the profession?
We need a much more improved dialogue. So the bank historians know a lot about culture, and I think it's much easier to run a bank when you have a deep entrenched culture. So if people have a sense of purpose, and the bank historians can tell us a lot about that.
But given that so many operations of banks, particularly central banks, are conducted in secrecy, what are some of the challenges in writing history and oral history of banking?
I'm not sure whether I would agree to that. So when you look at the central banks have now their monetary committees. They publish their minutes. That wasn't the case 20 years ago.
A major issue with the ECB, for example, is that a lot of its operations are conducted in secrecy.
But it has never been as transparent as it is today. So Mario Draghi does a tremendous job telling people what he does. So he was at the New Year reception of the German Stock Exchange on Monday and told us what he's going to do, why he's doing it, and he had 3 very important reasons why he's doing it. And he said, what would be the alternative? Doing nothing. So we know pretty well where he's going, and I think, therefore, that is part of the dialogue. So we didn't have it before. There are a lot of people who don't know where to look up the information, so starting a dialogue is always difficult, but eventually we will end up with a much higher level of transparency and accountability. And being an insider in the system, so I see a tremendous change. So for me, the financial system is much more transparent than it was at the beginning of my career.
And on that point, Harold James mentioned also in the talk that there have been some huge changes to the banking industry and banking history over the past few decades. In your view, what are some of these major changes, and how has this impacted banking history?
Well, we are today a technology business, which we were not 50 years ago. So therefore, the flow of information has accelerated. I said in my intervention during the panel that the banks are now a repository of transactions instead of information. So all that changed dramatically. We also gained an enormous amount of value out of this. Let's go in the past. So when Apple listed its stock, so in the early days of Steve Jobs, then the investment bank demanded 7% of the proceeds. So for every dollar paid in, the investment bank got 7 cents for the risk it took and the processing and all that. Today, these transactions cost less than 2%. So that means the prices for consumers, for our citizens, the return on investment for our pension plans are better than they were in the past, because banks now demand a much lower share of the fee income income than before. Now, these are things which are the result of a lot of technology and a lot of programming that has taken place in the financial industry. And I think that's actually very good. So, yes, the great financial crisis destroyed the trust that people had in the financial system. That's true, but on the other hand, so there are actually a lot of very good things happening in the financial system. You travel today around the world, you just have your bank card. When I traveled around the world at your age, I had to buy American Express travel checks, and they cost me 1% on the notional amount. That was very expensive. Doesn't cost you that. So we get very used to what is good for us, and sometimes forget that the banking, the financial system produces a lot of value for our citizens. But that doesn't say that we didn't make major mistakes in the great financial crisis.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you.